Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 13th of May, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today are Charles Malet and Vanessa Beeley. Later in the programme, Charles is going to be reporting on BBC Verify, at least one part of which seems to have been quietly shelved. Vanessa will have an update on anti-Semitism in the UK, and I'll be reporting on the latest Hantavirus news. But we'll begin today with the King's speech. Now, of course, the image that's on screen now is from the last King's speech, which was in July 2024, I think. I could be wrong about that. Maybe it was last year. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's the same old thing each time. It was very exciting, as I'm sure everybody will appreciate. The King laid out the government's agenda for this coming Parliament and demonstrated what a load of distraction the furore over whether or not Starmer is going to continue as Prime Minister is. The King announced 35 bills and draft bills. So let's just have a quick look at what's on the agenda then. So first of all, reversing Brexit. That's absolutely part and parcel of what's going on. Then, of course, using Ukraine and Iran wars to double down on the net zero energy policy because we need to be energy independent, apparently. The abolition of jury trials for more cases. We've been talking about that for several months now, but that is absolutely coming in this next parliamentary agenda. Strengthening the city mayor agenda by abolishing police and crime commissioners and moving that function to mayors and crime and policing boards. Reducing the voting age to 16. Forcing government to spend more money with small and medium-sized businesses because reliance on the state has to be expanded. And increasing censorship under the guise of protecting us all from state threats and extreme online content. And of course, let's not forget the key agenda item, which is digital ID. Now, that's just a snapshot of some of the more significant items. Much more is planned. Charles, this is the usual thing. Of course, we have the King opening a new session of Parliament and the latest legislative agenda. Lots to discuss within it, which we will do over the coming days and weeks. But no change is the key part of this.
Good afternoon, all. Thanks, Mike. Yes, no change, or so it seems. I suspect that when we get beyond the point at which these have to be delivered, there might turn out to be significant rowing back. I think particularly in the area of the net zero renewable commitments and indeed the decisions not to grant any more North Sea oil and gas licenses, but obviously we will have to see. I do not have a crystal ball. And I suppose just to remark on what's been said about Brexit, it is perfectly astonishing. I mean, this does look exactly like it is specifically there to divide, because, of course, the whole point of a referendum was that it's not supposed to be along political lines. It was supposed to be the will of the people, regardless of their political persuasion. And this demonstrates that it was absolutely nothing like that. And insofar as jury trials are concerned, there are no statistics to substantiate the points being made by Leveson and Lammy to say that dismissing juries, getting rid of juries, would actually make the system more efficient. The system has been made deliberately inefficient. So that is another area that is absolutely not being dealt with genuinely.
I'm going to be very interested to see what comments come out of Reform and Farage in the course of the day and the coming days, as you know, because Starmer's been talking about this move back towards a European focus for quite some time, and there hasn't been that much pushback from any sort of the traditional or the original Brexit campaigners that I've seen. So we'll see what happens over the next coming days. But let's move on then to the BBC, Charles, and BBC Verify. What is going on here?
Well, I wouldn't want to be accused of making a mountain out of a molehill, but I think this provides us with a good opportunity to take a look at something that has, exactly as you say, been quietly shelved. Now, BBC Verify, as many people will know, has been up and running for a few years, but the Times have just reported that a Verify blog that they started in June of last year, 2025, has indeed been kicked into the long grass. Now, what's interesting to note about that, of course, is that it wasn't really widely publicised. And we just go to the text from the Times article, which reports a member of staff saying it's ironic because the Verify Live page was set up to be more transparent. But now we're in a situation where a pet project has been quietly wound down with no transparency. And they ended up by saying, and license fee payers' money has been seemingly wasted. And of course, that is an interesting point, which we will return to. The article concluded slightly mysteriously with a quote from another BBC employee saying, "It doesn't diminish BBC Verify, which is growing in so many other ways." Now, exactly what that portends, I wouldn't know. But what I will do is just show you a video going back to the inauguration of Verify itself back in 2023.
We are a team of investigative journalists here at the BBC. We are also a new brand, and we are a physical location above the newsroom in London. And the point of the team, as you said, is to verify video, to fact check, to counter disinformation, and to analyse really complex stories so we can get to the truth of what's going on. Why does this matter? Well, mistruths can cause really serious harm to society and to the people in them. And so we want to show you our workings and really help you understand how we get to the bottom of what's happening. And there are other ways that we also are able to interrogate what's going on, including on social media. I have some undercover accounts that I've set up for the BBC's Americast podcast, and we use these kinds of undercover accounts, and these are the characters that the accounts belong to be able to really understand polarisation online and how what's happening on our social media feeds and what we're being recommended and pushed to us can affect all of us. And they don't offer us a totally exhaustive insight into what's going on, but they can help us understand just how social media works. And then there's also investigating other mistruths and the real world harm they can cause. At the moment, I'm investigating the UK's conspiracy theory movement. I'm trying to understand more about how it's evolved and intensified since the pandemic here in the UK. I'm looking at the alternative media that finds itself at the heart of this movement, and a conspiracy theory newspaper that's a part of that as well. I'm looking at the way that alternative media is funded. I'm looking at its impact on local communities. I'm looking at its connections with far-right figures and also its foreign links. That's for a podcast series that will be coming out in June. It's called Mariana in Conspiracy Land, and it will be available on BBC Sounds, Radio 4, asking that question, could January the 6th or a German coup attempt like we saw there ever happen here?
How the irony bites, because of course her throwaway remark there about January the 6th was exactly what brought down Deborah Turness, who had set up BBC Verify in the first place as the chief executive of BBC News. She, of course, fell on her sword, sort of, in December of 2025. And that is one significant point that needs to be made here, because, of course, it was the panorama fabrication of what had exactly happened on January the 6th that shook some of the foundations, at least, of the BBC. Now, the other thing she referred to there was having set up fake accounts. And I'm certainly not going to accuse either the BBC or Mariana Spring of straying into criminality. But what this does present is an opportunity to talk about the Online Safety Act, which, of course, came out in the same year, 2023. And we're just going to look in particular at Section 179, which concerns false communication offences. An offence is committed if the person sends a message and the message conveys information that the person knows to be false, and the person intended the message or the information in it to cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm. Now, for the sake of argument, had the BBC Verify team, in order to establish what it is that they said they were looking into, suggested things that had caused those effects, then it is an incredible provision of the Act that the following section, Section 180, contains exemptions from the offence, and a recognised news publisher cannot commit an offence under Section 179. So hypothetically, BBC Verify would not have committed an offence had they caused psychological harm in what Mariana Spring, the disinformation correspondent, was describing as perpetuating her investigations. Now, the other point to make, of course, is that she referred there to investigating the polarising of society rather than perhaps more accurately describing the role that the BBC has played in polarising society, in particular BBC Verify. And we're just going to take a slightly closer look at Mariana Spring herself, seen here wearing visor, face mask and rubber gloves, because you just can't be too careful, especially when you've got some propaganda to disseminate to the population. But she, of course, fell foul of, in a way, her own method of campaigning and so-called investigative journalism, because, of course, it was exposed fairly shortly after Verify had been set up that she had fabricated her own CV in order to get a job in Moscow. But less about that and more about what she did prior to Verify being established, going back to one of the lockdown protests in London. And in particular, listen to the language that she uses about the messaging app Telegram.
Presumably this is not a legal gathering, Mariana. How are the police responding to it?
It's not, and there's a really heavy police presence. There are a number of protesters who are here, often from anti-lockdown groups. They've organised themselves on Telegram, which is an encrypted messaging service, and a number of them have been promoting conspiracy theories about the vaccine, suggesting that it's unsafe or suggesting that the pandemic isn't real. Others are protesting for their liberty.
So she'd lost her visor and sadly her mask had slipped, but somehow she survived. And she survived to go on to speak to a Ukrainian. And talking about polarizing, as I did a moment ago, we just look at the text on screen now, saying that she's speaking to a celebrity influencer, Masha, to reveal how Ukrainian social media stars are secret weapons. And this girl was recruited to post patriotic content shared on Telegram. So, of course, when it suits BBC Verify, Telegram, in actual fact, is a good thing. And we're just going to listen to Mariana promoting Masha, the Ukrainian, as she did back then.
This week, I've been looking at how social media influencers are a secret weapon in the information war around Ukraine. I spoke to Masha, a Eurovision host and a social media star. Just hours before Russia invaded Ukraine, she was posting about creams and cosmetics on her Instagram feed. Now she's sharing updates about the war with millions of followers and countering Russian propaganda.
I talk a lot with my audience. I try to calm them, motivate them, go to my bathroom, cry a lot, then sitting, video on, and making video messages. My weapon is my language. My weapon is my voice.
Very interesting to see her using the word weapon there when describing the language and, of course, Telegram, or as the Home Office has tried to refer to it, Terragram. Now, I'm just going to wrap up by, as I say, not making a mountain out of a molehill, but with the charter renewal coming up in 2027, it's very interesting to look at this piece by Cordbusters, effectively suggesting that the BBC is heading in a very perilous direction, because not only are licence fee holders dropping spectacularly as the years go by, but also so are the fines that the BBC are able to recover from those they believe are not paying their licence fee. And of course, the fact that the Verify blog has been dispatched because there's so little interest in it, I think does spell the BBC is definitely going in a direction they do not want to be going in. Now, I hope we can talk about this more in Extra.
Thanks, Charles. I'll just say I deliberately didn't show King Charles in my segment, and then you impose 3 sections of Mariana Spring on us. That's I think we do need to discuss that in Extra. That's going to be some fun. Now, Vanessa, let's move on to Iran and Straits of Hormuz.
I didn't realize how close she was to being hit by a bus, actually, in that Telegram clip. But yes, let's come on to Iran. And this was an article very recently published in Washington Post. US intelligence says Iran can outlast Trump's Hormuz blockade for months. A confidential intelligence community assessment delivered to the White House also finds that Iran retains a substantial missile and drone arsenal. Of course, this is why Trump is claiming that he's sunk and destroyed absolutely everything in Iran. And according to the report, they still have 75% of pre-war mobile launchers. Goodness, having that picture next to me while I'm talking is very distracting. And 70% of their stockpile of missiles, and they have repaired much of the underground missile city and storage facilities. So then let's come on to Trump, who posted on Truth Social following some of these reports. When the fake news says that the Iranian enemy is doing well militarily, again, we've got capitals all over the place, against us, it's virtual treason in that it is such a false and even preposterous statement. They are aiding and abetting the enemy. all it does is to give Iran false hope when none should exist, note. There are American cowards that are rooting against our country. Iran had 159 ships in their navy. Every single ship is now resting at the bottom of the sea. So, of course, those that we're seeing hunting down vessels that try and cross the Hormuz are mirage. They have no navy. Their air force is gone. All technology is gone. Their leaders are no longer with us, and the country is an economic disaster. Only losers, ingrates, and fools are able to make a case against American President Donald J. Trump. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So at the moment, of course, in negotiations, Trump has basically rejected Iran's terms for discussion, which of course have shelved any discussion on the nuclear issue until the first terms are agreed to. So what has happened? Iran, basically the deputy commander of the IRGC Navy, the area of the Strait of Hormuz has become larger. In the past, the Strait of Hormuz was defined as a limited area around islands such as Hormuz and Hengam. However, under the new plan, the operational scope of the Strait of Hormuz has expanded significantly and is now defined as a strategic zone stretching from the coast of Jask and Syria to beyond the Greater Islands. In other words, the Strait of Hormuz has become larger and has turned into a vast operational region. So let's just have a quick look at the map, which demonstrates now that a much larger area of Hormuz is now going to be used to control the vessels transiting and also, of course, to extract tolls from those countries using it. But then, very interestingly, what is happening with internet? Well, if we look at these are basically the internet cables passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And what is Iran going to do? According to multiple reports, this was just one on X from Current Report, Iran is considering taking control of undersea internet cables passing through the Strait of Hormuz. According to Fars media, Iran may force foreign cable companies to get permits, pay fees, and follow Iranian laws. The cables carry around 15 to 20% of global internet and financial data traffic between Europe, the Gulf, and Asia. So what this might mean is that Iran will start charging annual license fees, and companies like Meta, Amazon, Microsoft will have to operate under Iranian law. And at the same time, the head of the National Security Commission for the Iranian parliament has said, if they are further attacked, Iran will enrich uranium to 90%. So punch for punch, I think Iran is knocking out at the moment.
Thanks for that, Vanessa. Well, sticking with the Strait of Hormuz, and John Healy posted this on X yesterday. The crisis in the Middle East, he said, affects British families, British companies, and British economy. We must meet this moment. We must have a hard focus on this crisis, as the months ahead will define the fortunes of our nation over the next few years. And the image with the post was of HMS Dragon, the ship which has been heading to the Strait of Hormuz for the last 2 months or so and never seems to get there. Now, that post on X follows Healy posting yet another meeting on the Strait of Hormuz, this time co-chairing a meeting of 40 defence ministers to, as he says there, build support for the UK-led mission to secure shipping through the Strait of Hormuz and announced UK military contributions. We must get on with the job, he said, restoring economic security for families here at home. Well, that X post was typical, and this is the typical response that he got, or at least it is indicative of the kind of response that he got to the announcement. So we've got, for those that aren't watching, a container of medicine there and labeled imbecillin, and it says take 4 times daily to maintain cognitive dissonance, and I think that's absolutely appropriate response. But anyway, let's just listen to the outcome of the meeting straight from the horse's mouth, delivered with a straight face. It's quite amazing.
The UK will provide our destroyer HMS Dragon, who is sailing to the region now. Will provide RAF Typhoons, ready to be retasked to fly defensive air patrols over the strait. Over £100 million to accelerate our new hybrid navy, including new drone boats and mine hunting systems, and advanced Royal Navy mine clearance specialists who are preparing for mine clearance operations. So the UK is stepping up to secure the strait. We all have a national interest and a national responsibility to do the same. And the purpose of this defence ministers meeting is to strengthen the political endorsement of this multinational mission and to encourage more nations to approve more military commitments to that mission.
It's just quite amazing because it never really seems to get started. But anyway, let's not forget that the Royal Navy has withdrawn another ship from service, leaving itself just 5 frigates. So this report here from Navy Lookout says HMS Iron Duke has been stripped of her weapons and sensors and has not been to sea since October 2025, despite no formal decommissioning announcement being made. Her withdrawal from active service less than 3 years after a £103 million refit raises uncomfortable questions about the Royal Navy's ability to sustain even its much reduced surface fleet. The current war agenda is without doubt a complete fraud. Now, I'm calling it a fraud not because it's not very real for the people on the receiving end of the bombs and the bullets. It's very real for them. I call it a fraud because there's no intention to actually achieve any of the outcomes geopolitically that are being described by our leaders here in the UK and the EU or in the United States. It's all about creating an environment where people accept a policy agenda that they otherwise wouldn't. The UK and even the United States have no weapons. They've spent them all killing people in Ukraine and Iran and through Israel, in fact, in Gaza and Lebanon, and through terrorist proxies in Syria, Sudan, Nigeria, Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso. I could go on with the list. That's our tax money that's being used to kill people while psychological operations run on us to convince us that we must accept every totalitarian agenda going to keep us safe. Charles, it's time for us to stop falling for it.
I think it is, absolutely. And just listening to John Healy, I can't believe many people are queuing up to buy a second-hand car from him. He seems very much unconvincing, but also his, the adherence to this idea of the defensive posture. He's as though describing somebody popping the gloves on, hopping into the ring for a bout of defensive boxing. It is quite extraordinary to hear him using this sort of language. But actually, the one bit that is true, when he talks about the national interest, of course, he doesn't mean what I'm about to say, but he is absolutely talking about the financial commitment to it, and therefore the fact that we are, through our taxes, funding exactly what is going on. So there is no possible way, in the way that he's describing it, of achieving what he says he's going to, exactly like you say, and yet he will keep banging that same drum.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on then, and just going to say once again, if you like what we do here at the UK Column, we do need your ongoing support. If you'd like to consider joining us as a member, details are on the UK Column website, and that keeps us going. If you can't support us financially, please share this program or any of the other material that we produce that you like, because that absolutely helps us defeat the censorship agenda. And of course, another way to defeat that is to pick up a copy of the UK Column magazine, which is on sale. It's called The Column. Issue 1's been out for a few weeks now. And if you haven't seen it yet, please consider picking one up. And the 20th anniversary UK Column event taking place 18th to 20th of September. Tickets are still going fast. Do pick up a ticket if you can join us for that. We would look forward to seeing you there. Now, tonight at 7 p.m., Jerem is speaking to Tom Luongo on being an American patriot. That's at 7 tonight. No Silk and Steel tonight for various reasons. Silk and Steel, I'm sure, will be back on Friday. And don't forget that tomorrow, Piers Robinson will be giving a presentation on manual or automated, a flight simulation study of the reported aircraft maneuvers on the 11th of September 2001. So this is following some exercises with flight simulators to see whether those flights could have been flown by a human being or whether it required automation to achieve the goal. Do join us for that at 5 p.m. tomorrow evening live. Okay, let's move on then to Hantavirus, and we'll bring Patrick's graphic on screen again for that. So this is the latest update from the UK Health Security Agency to the Hantavirus panic. Says that plans are underway to support those who will shortly return home to isolate following their time at Arrow Park. Now, this refers to Arrow Park Hospital in the Wirral, where public health specialists from UK HSA and infectious diseases specialists from the NHS have been assessing those affected. That's their words. Now, UK HSA says that public health and clinical specialists have assessed each passenger's individual circumstances, and where it's safe and possible, tailored support packages will be provided to enable people to isolate at home. So that's good. Over the coming days, the UK HSA, they say, will also support relocation of some contacts who were already isolating to places where they can safely self-isolate with access to appropriate specialist medical services. And that includes 10 people from the UK overseas territories of St. Helena and Ascension Island, who are going to be brought to the UK to complete their self-isolation as a precautionary measure. So we'll just bring Hanti on screen here, because we must remember that this is the new brand that we're heading for here. And of course, there are a small number of individuals who've been isolating at home or elsewhere in England. They are also going to be brought to Arrow Park for assessment. As I say, Hanti is lurking in all kinds of places. We don't have to worry. The timing's perfect, because hantavirus, which is a high consequence infectious disease, according to the UK HSA, will undoubtedly drive support for UK Gov's ongoing drive for sovereign AI that we mentioned a few weeks ago. Now, the latest announcement from Liz Kendall, Secretary of State for Science, Innovation, Technology, is a new bung to another AI company, this time Isomorphic Labs. This is under the Sovereign AI brand. Isomorphic Labs is a London-founded and headquartered company using AI to design and develop new medicines. Now, admittedly, not in the virology space. In this case, it's cancer and immunology. But don't worry, gov.uk has us all covered. They also announced a few days ago the Biosecurity Frontiers competition. Now, challenge 2 of this competition is pretty explicit. The government is seeking industry support in harnessing AI to support the identification and development of diagnostic, therapeutic, and vaccine candidates. This would likely focus on priority pathogens identified by the UK Health Security Agency and novel biological threats, and the use of predictive AI for structure-based diagnosis and DTV discovery and development. So Hanti is yet another gift to the sovereign AI defense AI agenda, which just keeps on giving. It will be used to justify increased spending of money the country doesn't have on projects that will have no positive impact on any of our lives. Both of these are sovereign AI projects, but only one is branded that way. The other one is branded absolutely as a national security issue, and therefore a defense project. And we should not forget that the West has a history of attempting to weaponize both virology and cancer, including the Special Virus Cancer Program at the National Cancer Institute and the work related to that at Fort Detrick. So, this is absolutely being presented as, or at least the hantavirus sort of story is being used to wind up stress within the population. And of course, they, in the meantime, are spending hundreds of millions of pounds on this stuff of taxpayers' money. To what end? It's not for our benefit, I don't believe, Charles. But let's move on to Africa.
We will. Thank you, Mike. Yes. And I would just prefix this report by saying that although what I'm going to be talking about is actually physically taking place in Africa, I think I would invite you to look at it with a critical eye and think about how it pertains to wherever it is you're living, because despite the change of location, the themes are absolutely consistent with what we face, certainly here in the United Kingdom, and I dare say in most countries on Earth. So with that in mind, I would introduce the Africa Forward Summit 2026, which has just concluded in Nairobi, hosted by the president there, William Ruto, who was quoted as saying, "Africa must finance Africa." Now, again, with that in mind, I think it's very interesting to point to the documentation that they published prior to the event and the Voices Shaping Africa's Future. The two most prominent on the bill were Ruto himself and, behind the question mark, Emmanuel Macron, because, of course, this was a joint summit between France, or at least organised in the main by France, the first non-Francophone country that France has attempted to conduct such an exercise in. So that's very significant. But also, as I say, significant that Ruto and Macron would be effectively both regarded on a par as being the voices that should shape Africa's future, given the relationship between France and many of the Francophone countries in Africa and the deterioration of that relationship for very obvious reasons. It does seem strange that that Macron himself would be touted as somebody that should speak for Africa or Africans. Now, with regard to the amount of money flowing through the system, this, of course, should be noted as following on the heels of the Invest in Ethiopia meeting in recent months, which, of course, generated a significant amount of investment from China, and it exposes the discrepancy between the policies of China and the United States, and indeed we should consider that in light of Donald Trump's proposed visit, or rather visit to China, and the different approach where effectively America for years has been trying to acquire resources in Africa through the supposed donation of aid, whereas of course the Chinese model, and indeed the model of many others now, the French, is to invest in order to procure such resources. But just to further the point about, is this really Africans speaking for Africa? We'll now listen to Antonio Guterres, who of course is the Secretary General for the United Nations.
Let us be honest about what stands in Africa's way. A global system designed without Africa and still largely operating without Africa, perpetuating century-old injustices. A continent of more than 1.5 billion people with no permanent seats on the UN Security Council, as was referred by President William Ruto. Without the voice, the representation, and decision-making power it deserves inside the international financial institutions that shape this economy, it's not Africa that loses, it's the world that loses.
English is not Guterres' first language, but to describe the situation as being the world losing is absolutely indicative of the flavour of all these sorts of summits, which are in effect designed in order that through the cooperation, or at least supposedly bilateral agreements between, in this instance, France and Kenya to host the summit, it obviously brings in corporations who have the ability to therefore influence the situation to their own ends. And therefore, it's of no great surprise to see that at the bottom of the list of faces, which were mostly dark-skinned, there were a few others, notably Sonia Nishtar, Jerome Kim, and Peter Sands, who respectively represent Gavi, the International Vaccine Institute, and the Global Fund, which of course is also concerned with pharmaceuticals and health. So the exact model of getting testing out into remote African communities in order that a diagnosis can be made and medicines are therefore almost enforced on the population. And of course, this is tied in with all the 7 themes that have been running through this event, which are the industrialization, or at least the greening of industrialization, AI, peace and security, health, the so-called blue economy, agriculture, and finance. So this has been happening on the eastern side of Africa. And we look to the west to see that just yesterday in Côte d'Ivoire, the ID for Africa 2026 summit started there. And to give you an idea of what that's all about, at the beginning of the explanatory text, digital identity is the cornerstone of digital transformation. So as I said at the outset, please don't consider that this is just about Africa. This is absolutely about everywhere where this is being rolled out. And of course, the advantage in Africa, in some senses, is that there is no legacy infrastructure in the way of rolling this kind of thing out from now into the future. ID for Africa, of course, has been running for some time, again, funded, among others, by the Gates Foundation, but this year really represents a sort of an uplift in what it is exactly that they're doing. So quite wordy, but there is a bit of text that describes that wanting to change their focus from the digital public infrastructure to the broader vision of digital public ecosystems, DPEs, and that it recognises that sustainable digital transformation rests on the interplay of human, legal, institutional, and sectoral dimensions. This, to most people, will seem completely meaningless. The point of it is that what they're saying is this really is going to involve everything and everyone, and that by embracing an ecosystem approach, they acknowledge the diversity of assets, ensure interoperability across boundaries, and establish collective governance that fosters trust and resilience. That might sound like complete and utter nonsense to you, and nonsense it may be. But the point is that there are now a number of countries aligned with indeed the corporations that can conduct this stuff to foist it on Africans, and if it works there, it will be deemed to be working anywhere else. Now, of course, similar to the faces that appeared at the bottom of the list on the Forward Summit, I'll just point you towards the patrons and partners, and of course, among the headlines there we have the World Bank, Co-Develop, which is a sort of an amalgam of philanthropists, and the Gates Foundation. So no particular surprise with that. And I think really this is more of the same insofar as the modern day scramble for Africa is concerned. What Macron appears to be doing, certainly with the Forward Summit here, is just putting things in slightly different terms, but it should be absolutely regarded as no coincidence that this does follow on the heels of the Ethiopian summit, given Ethiopia's proximity to the Horn of Africa and how that pertains to the security situation in the wider Middle East, but also concerning the competition, let's say, between Russia, the United States, and China. So, Mike, I don't know if you've got any particular comment on this or the way in which it looks like it's going, but as I say, my particular comment with considering not just what's going on in Africa, but how this is really speaking for the wider picture.
It absolutely is. But of course, the trouble that Africa has been facing for the last lot of decades has been the heavy debt burden that it's had to carry and the manipulation of that debt burden. But of course, we're all becoming countries that are burdened by huge quantities of debt. But let's move to the Middle East again and Syria, Vanessa, and it also having its debt problems.
Well, of course, it never really had debt problems pre-2011. It had totally independent banking systems. And of course, that is one of the reasons it was set up for destruction and destabilization. And so now, of course, Syria under al-Qaeda and President Jolani, or Ahmed al-Sharaa, as the West likes to rebrand him, Syria is now being pulled into the vortex of debt slavery and now the entire digital AI, probably eventually CBDC system. So what has been happening in the last couple of days, Syria tests Visa and MasterCard payments after 15 years, because of course, pre-2011, Syria did have the ability to use credit cards and international monetary systems, but of course that was all taken away from them after the start of the regime change war. So what are they actually saying? So cooperation with Visa and MasterCard to develop digital infrastructure. And as Charles said in Africa, of course, that entire infrastructure is currently missing to really impose any kind of digital tyranny. However, if we actually look at what is going on, he said the trial of the first system marked Syria's entry into the global digital payment system. So therefore, they are heading into some kind of AI digital system, both now and in the future. And in September 2025, the Central Bank of Syria also signed a memorandum of understanding with MasterCard International to cooperate on developing Syria's digital payment system. And of course, this is heavily backed by the Gulf states, in particular UAE and to some degree Qatar. Now, initially, this is partnering through a company called Paymira with Syrian banking institutions. But if you look at our mission, they're intending to extend this over cross-border operations. And so, as I said, this is being heavily backed, particularly, I would say, by Saudi Arabia to bring in not only this digital system, but also debt and slavery with a country which is already now well below the poverty line. And anyway, here is a video of Jolani paying for his coffee with his brand new MasterCard or Visa. I can't quite see what that is. But effectively, what he's doing, of course, is steering the country, as I've said, into debt enslavement, while his mercenary forces of Takfiri and Wahhabi terrorists are continuing to both kidnap, murder, assassinate, massacre, slaughter, imprison, detain, torture on a daily basis all communities now in Syria. It's not only focused on the ethnic minorities, but across the board. And guess what? Now, what is arriving in Syria that some people are celebrating? It's McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Domino's, Burger King. So all of the disgusting American food is coming in to replace the Syrian fast food, which was known to be some of the healthiest and the best in the region. And then finally, this is again the Saudi influence. This is Umayyad Mosque. Again, it has been privatized, as we talked about Mount Qasioun previously. You can see Qatari and Saudi sheikhs there. This is the opening of a restaurant inside Umayyad Mosque. And here, of course, it's not only a Muslim place of pilgrimage, it's also a Catholic Christian place of pilgrimage, because here there is the shrine of John the Baptist where, according to historical documents, his head has been basically enshrined in Umayyad Mosque. So Syria slips further into a morass of debt, poverty, starvation, and so on, while Jolani uses his MasterCard. All's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Vanessa. And of course, that's down to the UK and the EU and the United States primarily. Charles, let's come back to you then. And well, has Russia developed a new weapon?
Well, that's a good question. And I suppose one might say that it's not exactly new, but I will just prefix this by talking about what Vanessa showed with Trump talking about the Iranian Navy all being resting at the bottom of the sea and this, that, and the other. And I think just in considering what capabilities do exist around the world, it is interesting to observe that the way the Russians are treating, or at least dealing with the situation at hand and presenting the information is very different from the United Kingdom, anything that John Healey has to say, and indeed what you've just been talking about with the other retired frigate. This is the announcement yesterday that the SARMAT missile system has been successfully tested for the first time since they've been trying to do so in the last number of years. And we'll just look at that now. This has not come from a Bond film. This was posted on Twitter by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs by Russia.
Расчет получен приказ. Есть приказ. Подготовиться к совместным действиям. Совместным действиям готов. Проконтролировать правильность набора. Набор верен. Внимание, расчет. Вот. Есть вот. Приказ введен.
There we go. That is the SARMAT, referred to by Westerners as Satan 2. It is reported, at least on X, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as having a range of 35,000 kilometers. Now, for those of you believing that you know the dimensions of the Earth, which has a reported circumference of approximately 40,000, one has to ask the question, why does it need to go 35,000 kilometers? That could be a typo. I'm not quite sure. But the point is that it is an absolutely enormous weapon system with a payload that may be nuclear, we are told. And that presents me with the opportunity to point you towards a very recent podcast that Germ conducted with Michael Palmer entitled All Nuclear Weapons Are Fake. And I would encourage you to listen to that because it does deal with the history of the threats of nuclear warfare, nuclear bombs. And I think this is particularly pertinent given the threats of total annihilation that Donald Trump keeps issuing to Iran. So on the one hand, we've got Russia producing something that seems to be invincible at the moment, unless, of course, it's destroyed before it takes off. And on the other hand, we look to Plymouth Sound, where from the naval base in Devonport, we have movement. A ship is being escorted out into the Sound, and it's absolutely brand new. But the only thing is, it's not British. This is Den Helder, a resupply ship, Dutch, and built recently by Damen, just undergoing final training out in the Sound. And the only thing really to report from Plymouth, described here in Plymouth Plus, is that HMS Queen Elizabeth, the other aircraft carrier, been keeping a rather low profile recently, has been dominating Plymouth Sound under tight security. But that apparently is all she's really been up to. I thought I couldn't really resist showing the photograph of the tight security. And if you can't see this, it is one MOD police van parked up on the shore, presumably absolutely unable to do anything. So that is the state of affairs that we're in comparison with Russia at the moment.
Thank you, Charles. Vanessa, let's come back to you. And of course, last week we were focusing quite a bit on the anti-Semitism narrative that's being built by the British government at the moment. What's the latest?
Well, of course, not only being built by the British government, but enshrined in the 2030 Israel-UK roadmap. So I just wanted to, I know, Mike, that you covered the attack on an anti-war protester back in the last week of April, who was protesting the Israeli Zionist US. I won't include the UK because, of course, they're purely defensive, but the war against and aggression against Iran. So let's just roll the video of the event itself.
وای من بیایید جنایت پهلویچیا حرومزاده‌های تخلوی زدن.
So, of course, this was Mohammad Reza. He's a father of two. He was protesting the aggression against Iran, and he was allegedly stabbed by pro-Pahlavi, pro-regime change Iranians in the same protest. Let's have a look at how this was reported. So this was in the Standard. I actually struggled to find any detailed reports on it. Iranian national in custody after stabbing at central London protests. So, of course, there is no context there at all. And then let's look for the context in the article itself. Metropolitan police officers responded to reports of an altercation in Whitehall just before 7:20 p.m. on Wednesday evening, so no terrorism there. The court heard a protest was taking place and counter-protesters were also in attendance, the two parties being anti-Iranian regime protesters and pro-Iranian regime demonstrators. So again, we're reducing Iran down to regime. There is no description of the fact that this was an unwarranted attack and effectively terrorism to some degree. The Crown says that members of the public told police on the scene that someone had been stabbed. 5 people were arrested. His injuries are not believed to be life-threatening or life-changing. Odd phrasing there. And then I want to compare that to the BBC report, which was extremely lengthy on what we know about the Golders Green stabbings. Again, I know Mike has looked into the comparison here, but I just want to go through it again because of how this is being weaponized to raise a state of alarm in the UK about an alleged targeting of Jewish communities in the UK. So let's have a look at what the BBC says in the article itself. 2 Jewish men have been stabbed in Golders Green, North London, in an attack police have declared as a terrorist incident. Wasn't declared as such when an Iranian pro-regime protester was pro-government protester was attacked. The men, one in his 70s, another in his 30s, remain in a stable condition in hospital. A 45-year-old man has been arrested. It comes after a spate of arson attacks against Jewish property in London in recent weeks. Here is what we know so far, and they go on to say, The suspect had a history of serious violence and mental health issues, but it's still terrorism. He added in a statement at the scene on Wednesday afternoon. The Met later said officers also carried out a search on an address in southeast London where detectives were investigating an incident that was reported to police and is believed that the suspect is the same individual arrested in Golders Green. This is extraordinary. This was the first attack which was on a Muslim man, and yet the BBC somehow manages to entirely omit that from the report itself. Why is that? And then if we have a look at, this is basically the reaction from everyone. There was very little, if any, reaction to the stabbing of Mohammed Reza. But here, London Mayor Sadiq Khan said he was angry, appalled, and disgusted that Jewish people were living their lives frightened. He was deeply concerned by the attack. His thoughts and prayers are with the two individuals, not the three, who were injured, and offers his heartfelt gratitude to those who so selflessly rushed to their aid, one of whom, by the way, said the attack was utterly appalling, adding attacks on our Jewish community are attacks on Britain, but apparently attacks on Iranian attacks on Britain. Then this gets interesting. So now British police are probing a shadowy Islamic group amid arson spree at Jewish sites, Haye, I'm not going to read out the entire name, that apparently has links to the Iranian IRGC, the military force in Iran. However, this is entirely spurious. This group came into existence around the beginning of March 2026, so a few days after the war against Iran was launched by the US and Israel, with Britain as a defensive support. And I would urge everyone to read this incredibly well-researched article by Professor David Miller, whom we all know, how a fake Iranian terror group was invented to proscribe IRGC in Europe, the story of Ashab al-Yamin. And what does David say? This investigation reveals that there is no such group. It appears to be a fictional cutout. Half of its reported activities simply didn't occur. The other half was so amateurish and inconsequential with not a single injury. One theory is that they may have been messily undertaken by hired gig criminals and or incompetent Syanim, the name given to Mossad's network of helpers in countries all over the world. This analysis shows that even the Zionist regime and its assets and establishment think tanks acknowledge that so-called gig criminals have been involved in a series of events in a striking parallel in Australia, 14 of them between October 2024 and January 2025, which were similarly low impact with no casualties and were declared to be fake by Australian police in March 2025. And then if we look at David's conclusion here, which I totally agree with, claims of a coordinated campaign may be shaping public perception, of course, to encourage war against Iran, fueling fears of rising anti-Semitism, which will bring in surveillance and persecution of Muslim communities, particularly in the UK, calls for expanded security measures and proscribing the IRGC as a terrorist organization amid an illegal war. And of course, by proscribing the IRGC, just as they did with Palestine Action and Hamas and Hezbollah, it means that if somebody is protesting the Israeli aggression against Iran, which Britain is complicit with, as it was complicit with the genocide against Gaza and now West Bank, anyone protesting that is going to be considered supporting and promoting terrorism.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. Thank you for that. Now, Charles, let's just finish off with the issue of fertilizer, because, of course, what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz is driving up fertilizer prices. We've talked about this over the last couple of weeks. What's the latest?
Well, it is interesting how much can be said without actually saying it. The government have put out, or actually have updated, a press release about regulations concerning fertilizer. And of course, since the Iran conflict started in late February, there has been an outcry about fertiliser or the lack of synthetic fertiliser. Of course, nobody has really pointed out the enormous inconsistency between the government telling people that they may not use combustion engines because they use oil-derived products, and yet when that comes to fertiliser, it doesn't seem to make any difference. But the reason this is something worth reporting on now is because the deadline for a consultation has just been extended until the 10th of June. And I just want to take a look at the consultation itself, because, of course, anyone that has taken part in a consultation will know this to be the case. Up in the top left on the DEFRA page, you can see some small text, which I will just enlarge. And it says, on the right-hand side, it says, "We asked, you said, we did." Now, I found that two missing words had fallen off, and I've included them. We asked, you said, we did the opposite, because that is pretty much the way that any consultation goes. And of course, you'll note the path between saying that there's going to be additional regulation and then asking for a consultation, rather than it being the other way around. So the public obviously not being invited to give their view in any sort of meaningful way. Nonetheless, this is what they say about it. They say reform of the fertilisers legislation aims to support innovation in the fertiliser sector by smoothing the route to market for newer and novel fertilising products which are less polluting to the environment or are less resource intensive in their creation. Effectively, this is the government and DEFRA in a panic because of the inability to convert liquefied natural gas into fertiliser in the way that it had been done, because obviously the prices have changed quite dramatically, and indeed there's an imbalance in the supply. Now, what I would like to do is set this alongside what else is going on. But before I do that, I will just point out that when we consider what might happen next, they're saying that they're planning to increase user confidence in a more diverse range of safe and effective fertilizing products. So I think one has to really consider in this, whilst it might be applauded in many quarters, that doing away with synthetic fertilizer, which are, of course, ultimately very damaging and perpetuate a cycle of chemical introductions into the environment, into the soil, which, frankly, the soil would be far better off without. What is the alternative? So what I would do is just to conclude by pointing back to the Soil Association petition that I reported on last week, because there is definitely pushback in this area, and I would include the DEFRA consultation in this. This petition is specifically about the use of glyphosate as a pre-harvest drying agent, which was banned by the EU in 2023, and the government has a chance to do the same. Now, there is a petition and the link will be in the show notes, but what I should point out is that since reporting on it last week, 42,000 people have signed that petition. So I think it is really worth getting behind, not necessarily because I'm saying that it's going to have an outcome that changes the policy on its head, but it will be a significant indicator of, first of all, people's awareness of this as being an issue, which of course so many aren't, but also that people do want it to change.
Charles, thank you. Let's just have a bit of an end finally here now. Of course, the hantavirus it's being claimed has come from rats, but what we have a little bit of video here. Just introduce it for us.
Gorgeous, gorgeous girls get vaccinated. Gorgeous vaccinated girls get boosted. And gorgeous boosted girls get boosted again, if you're eligible. I normally wouldn't make a video like this, but I feel like I need to say something, so I wrote a few things down. I am currently on board the MV Hondius, and what's happening right now is very real for all of us here. We're not just a story. We're not just headlines. We're people. People with families, with lives, with people waiting for us at home. There's a lot of uncertainty, and that's the hardest part. All we want right now is to feel safe, to have clarity, and to get home. So if you're seeing coverage about this, just remember that there are real people behind it, and that this isn't something happening somewhere far away. It's happening to us right now. I'll share more when I can, but for now, I just ask for your kindness and understanding.
No, that was tantalizing because, of course, what I was about to do was introduce it, because that might not have made sense totally. But that is a chap called Joel Rosmarin. Actually, sorry, Joel might not be quite the right first name. I forget his first name. But it is just absolutely remarkable, given the optics on this rat virus, that yet again, the right people seem to be in the right place at the right time. And the first clip was from 2022. He has a very public profile as a travel blogger, and he was posting regularly about the amount of vaccines and boosters that he'd taken, and of course the encouragement for others to do so, as I say, in a very public setting. And lo and behold, there he was speaking to the New York Post as one of the people interned on the rat ship. It is completely remarkable. And the only question remaining to be asked is, where is Roland Rat?
Thank you for that. That's where we'll leave it for today, because we are absolutely out of time. Thanks to Charles and Vanessa. Thanks to everybody that's been watching. If you're a UK column member, stay on the stream. We'll have some news extra for you in a couple of minutes' time. Otherwise, Germ tonight, there'll be an interview or discussion going out tomorrow at 1 p.m. and then the news again on Friday at 1 p.m. as usual. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.